Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. I'm Brenna Victoria, and today we are going to be talking about the disappearance of Beverly Rose Potts. Beverly Rose Potts was born April 15, 1941. She was an American girl from Cleveland, Ohio, who in 1951 became the subject of a famous missing persons case when she disappeared only a few blocks from her home after attending a show in a nearby park. She has never been found, and her disappearance remains unsolved. Beverly was described as a shy, quiet, and responsible child, fascinated by the performing arts, who was due to enter the 5th grade in the fall of 1951. At the time, she was living on Lynette Avenue with her parents, Robert and Elizabeth Potts, and her 22-year-old sister, Anita. This picture that I'm using above was the last known image of Potts from August 19, 1951, 5 days before her disappearance, showing her with a fresh new haircut, or in that day, a new bob. On August 24th, she and a friend and a neighbor, Patsy Swing, were given permission to see the show wagon, an annual summer children's performance event being held that evening in the Holloran Park, less than a quarter mile from where the girls' homes were. This was a special treat as the park was generally considered unsafe after dark when large trees dimmed the surrounding streetlights. It was also frequented by local vagrant population. The girls initially went to the park on their bicycles around 7 p.m. At 8 p.m., deciding it would be easier to maneuver on foot through the large crowds in attendance, they returned home to drop off their bikes, arriving back at the show sometime around 8:30 p.m. At about 8:45, Swing, who had promised to be home before dark, suggested they leave for home. Potts said that she had been given permission to stay for the entire show, which was not due to end until after 9 p.m., so Swing went back to her own house alone. Swing last saw Potts in the crowd still watching the performance on stage, and about 9:30 p.m., when the show had ended and the park was empty, a 13-year-old boy who knew Potts saw her heading diagonally across the park into a northeasterly direction, about 150 yards from the corner of Lynette Avenue and West 117th Street. This would be the quickest route to Beverly's home, which would then only be a few minutes' walk away. The boy recognized Potts by her distinctive duck-like gait, walking with toes pointed outward. Several other witnesses said they had seen a girl resembling Potts near a battered black 1937 Dodge Coupe, idling on West 117th Street, apparently speaking to two young men inside. The various witnesses placed this encounter anywhere around 8:30 and 9:30 p.m., but none of them had seen the girl entering the car. When Potts did not return home by 10 p.m., her parents began searching the area. About an hour later, having found no sign of her, they called the police. The police immediately began a large-scale search of their own, but were unable to find any traces of Potts. Even after several days' investigation, including door-to-door canvassing of nearby neighborhoods, tracing suspicious cars, searching nearby vacant lots, and using a plane to survey open railway cars. Police received and investigated thousands of telephone tips, which had been spurred by the extensive press coverage of the disappearance, but none provided any solid leads. Potts' family members were quickly cleared. Investigators determined that her home life had been stable and by all accounts happy, and there appeared to be no reason for her to have run away. Potts was known to be unusually shy, especially around males, and particularly cautious of strangers. Investigators theorized that she had most likely been enticed into a nearby home or car on her way home by someone she knew, perhaps with the promise of a babysitting job. Despite her youth, Potts was regularly hired as a sitter for neighborhood children, on a request to run an errand. It was thought that Potts might have been killed by a neighbor and buried in or around one of the nearby houses on Lynette Avenue. and at least one search to that effect was carried out in 1973 in the basement of what by then was an auto body shop. However, no signs of Potts were found there or elsewhere, and no plausible local suspect has been uncovered. Shortly after her disappearance, a $1,500 award, equivalent to $14,775 in 2019, was offered by her father's union, AFL Stagehands, for clues to her whereabouts. Now, you may be wondering about suspects. Well, there were several suspects that emerged over the years, but none can be definitively linked to the case. In 1955, Harvey Lee Rush, a drifter and Cleveland native, told police in California that he had killed Potts after luring her to a nearby bridge with candy. However, he placed the murder in 1952, a year after Potts' actual disappearance. Rush recanted his entire story after being extradited to Cleveland, saying that he had confessed merely as a way to get back to his hometown. In 1980, two retired Cleveland police detectives, James First and Robert Shanklin, revealed that in 1974 they had a tip from a local attorney with a client whose brother had supposedly confessed to abducting Potts. The detectives subsequently found and questioned the brother, who they said had readily admitted to having lived near Holloran Park in 1951 and making a habit of picking up and molesting young girls there. The man did not remember abducting Potts in particular, but he said he had flashes of memory involving a girl named Beverly. First and Shanklin were convinced the man was guilty, but the county prosecutor's office refused to pursue the case, citing a lack of evidence. Another suspect was William Henry Redmond, an Ohio native and former carnival worker who was indicted in 1988 for the 1951 Pennsylvania murder of 8-year-old Jane Marie Althoff. While in prison, Redmond reportedly told a cellmate that he had killed three other young girls. When questioned about the Potts case in particular, Redmond refused to make a statement one way or the other. He was in the general area at the time of Potts' disappearance and had a record of child molestation convictions dating back to 1935. However, Potts would have been considerably older than his previous victims. In 1994, a letter was discovered under a carpet in a Cleveland house, written by a woman who claimed to have caught her husband disposing of Potts' body in their furnace. Upon being traced and questioned by police, the woman said that the allegation was false. She had written the letter solely as a revenge fantasy against her abusive husband. More letters were sent to reporter Brent Larkin of the Cleveland Plain Dealer beginning in 2000. Purportedly to be from an elderly and infirm man who claimed that he wanted to confess to molesting and murdering Potts before his imminent death. The anonymous author pledged to turn himself in on August 24, 2001, the 50th anniversary of Potts' disappearance, but shortly beforehand wrote again to say that he had to enter a nursing home and would be unable to honor his promise or otherwise reveal himself. An extensive investigation failed to turn up any clues to the author's identity. Larkin now believes the letters to have been a hoax. The enduring mystery of Potts' apparent random disappearance and the extensive investigation quickly captured the imagination of the press, and by extension, the entire city, becoming notorious, especially among parents fearful for their own children's safety. It has since become one of Cleveland's most well-known missing person cases. Thea Gallo Becker, author of Legendary Locals of Cleveland, says that it remains one of the most haunting and heartbreaking mysteries in Cleveland history. Potts' mother died in 1956. It had been said that her demise reportedly hastened by the heartbreak over her daughter's disappearance. And her father, in 1970, Beverly's only sibling, Anita, continued to search for her until her own death in 2006. There is a memorial marker for Beverly situated next to the graves of of her parents. Now, this is quite sad, knowing that her family still continued to look for her even after there was no evidence proving that any of their neighbors took the kids, or at least took Beverly. Her mother died in 1956, and then her father died in 1970. And her sister continued looking for her until she died in 2006. It's very sad to know that this case is still being looked at, and they're still trying to find her body. I mean, this is back in the 1950s, so I'm sure even then there was, acid that they could dissolve her bones. But I really do hope that that's not the case, and I hope they do find her soon. And if Anita had any children and they continued to look for their aunt after their mom died, I really hope that they do find her body. Or even just her dress or whatever clothing she was wearing that night. It's heartbreaking to know that every year kids are going missing. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's heartbreaking when adults go missing, but it's usually the children that you end up crying for because, they're scared, they're alone. They don't know why they're being taken. They're not sure why they're being raped. All they know is that fear is the only thing that's going to probably keep them alive, or that they're going to end up dead. Anyways, that's all for tonight on the disappearance of Beverly Potts. I hope you all have a great evening, a great day, or a great afternoon. And I will be back within a week or two to post the 5th episode of the American Mafia Families. Have a good night.